Welcome to Bible Story Time. It's 2 Kings 22:1 through 23:30. It says, Josiah was 8 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled in Jerusalem for 31 years. His mother was Jedidah, the daughter of Ada, from the town of Bozkath. Josiah did what was pleasing to the Lord. He followed the example of his ancestor King David, strictly obeying all the laws of God. In the 18th year of his reign, King Josiah sent the court secretary, Shaphan, the son of Azaliah and grandson of Meshullam, to the temple with the order: go to the high priest Hilkiah and get a report on the amount of money that the priests on duty at the entrance to the temple have collected from the people. Tell him to give the money to the men who are in charge of the repairs in the temple. They are to pay the carpenters, the builders, and the masons, but the timber and buy the timber and the stones used in the repairs. The men in charge of the work are thoroughly honest, so there is no need to require them to account for the funds. Shaphan delivered the king's order to Hilkiah, and Hilkiah told them that he had found the book of the law in the temple. Hilkiah gave him the book, and Shaphan read it. Then he went back to the king and reported, "Your servants have taken the money that was in the temple and have handed it over to the men in charge of the repairs." And then he said, "I have here a book that Hilkiah gave me," and he read it aloud to the king. When the king heard the book being read, he tore his clothes into dismay and gave the following order to Hilkiah the priest, to Acham, son of Shaphan, to Achbor, son of Micah, to Shaphan the court secretary, and to Asaiah the king's attendant: go and consult the Lord for me and for all the people of Judah about the teachings of this book. The Lord is angry with us because our ancestors have not done what this book says must be done. Hilkiah, Acham, Achbor, Shaphan, and Asaiah went to consult a woman named Huldah, a prophet who lived in the newer part of Jerusalem. Her husband Shallum, the son of Tikvah and grandson of Haris, was in charge of the temple's robes. Well, they described to her what had happened, and she told them to go back to the king and give him the following message from the Lord: I'm going to punish Jerusalem and all its people. As written in the book that the king has read, they have rejected me and have offered sacrifices to other gods, so have stirred up my anger by all that have done. My anger is aroused against Jerusalem, and it will not die down. As for the king himself, this is what I, the Lord God of Israel, say. You listen to what is written in the book, and you repented and humbled yourself before me, tearing your clothes and weeping, when you heard how I threatened to punish Jerusalem and its people. I will make it a terrifying sight, a place whose name people will use as a curse. But I have heard your prayer, and the punishment which I am going to bring on Jerusalem will not come until after your death. I will let you die in peace." The men returned to King Josiah with this message. King Josiah summoned all the leaders of Judah and Jerusalem, and together they went to the temple, accompanied by the priests and the prophets and all the rest of the people, rich and poor alike. Before them, all the king read aloud the whole book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple. He stood by the royal column and made a covenant with the Lord to obey him, to keep his laws and commands with all his heart and soul, and to put into practice the demands attached to the covenant as written in the book. And all the people promised to keep the covenant. Then Josiah ordered the high priest Hilkiah, his assistant priests, and the guards on duty at the entrance of the temple to bring out of the temple all of the objects used in the worship of Baal, of the goddess Asherah, and of the stars. The king burned all these objects outside the city near Kidron Valley, and then had the ashes taken to Bethel. He removed from office the priests that the kings of Judah had ordained to offer sacrifices on the pagan altars in the cities of Judah and in places near Jerusalem. All the priests who offered sacrifices to Baal, to the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars, he removed from the temple the symbol of the goddess Asherah, took it out of the city to Kidron Valley, burned it, pounded its ashes to dust, and scattered it over the public burying ground. He destroyed the living quarters in the temple, accompanied by the temple prostitutes. It was there that women wove robes used in worship of Asherah. He brought to Jerusalem the priests who were in the cities of Judah, and throughout the whole country he desecrated the altars where they had offered sacrifices. He also tore down the altars dedicated to the goat demons near the gate built by Joshua, the city governor, which was also to the left of the main gate as one enters the city. Those priests were not allowed to serve in the temple, but they could eat the unleavened bread provided for their fellow priests. King Josiah also desecrated Topheth, the pagan place of worship in the Hinnom Valley, so that no one could sacrifice his son or daughter as a burnt offering to the god Molech. He also removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the worship of the sun, and he burned the chariots used in his worship. These were kept in the temple courtyard near the gate, not far from the living quarters of Nathan, Melech, and a high official. The altars, which the kings of Judah had built on the palace roof above King Ahaz's quarters, King Josiah tore down, along with the altars put up by King Manasseh. In the two courtyards of the temple, he smashed the altars to bits and threw them into Kidron Valley. Josiah desecrated the altars that King Solomon had built east of Jerusalem, south of Mount of Olives, for the worship of disgusting idols. Astarte, the goddess of Sidon, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Moloch, the god of Ammon. King Josiah broke the stone pillars to pieces, cut down the symbols of the goddess Asherah, and the ground where they had stood he covered with human bones. Josiah also tore down the place of worship in Bethel, which had been built by King Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who led Israel into sin. Josiah pulled down the altar, broke its stones into pieces, and pounded them to dust. He also burned the image of Asherah. Then Josiah looked around and saw some tombs there on the hill. He had the bones taken out of them and burned on the altar. In this way, he desecrated the altar, doing what the prophet had predicted long before during the festival of King Jeroboam. Was standing by the altar. King Josiah looked around and saw the tomb of the prophet who had made this prediction. "Whose tomb is that?" he asked. The people of Bethel answered, "It is the tomb of the prophet who came to Judah and predicted that these things that you have done to this altar." "Leave it as it is," Josiah ordered. his bones are not to be removed. So his bones were not moved. Neither were those of the prophet who had come from Samaria. In every city of Israel, King Josiah tore down all the pagan places of worship, which had been built by the kings of Israel, who thereby aroused the Lord's anger. He did to all those altars what he had done in Bethel. He killed all the pagan priests on the altars where they served, and he burned human bones on every altar. Then he returned to Jerusalem. King Josiah ordered the people to celebrate the Passover in honor of the Lord their God, as written in the book of the covenant. No Passover like this one had ever been celebrated by any of the kings of Israel or Judah since the time where judges ruled the nation. Now, at last, in the 18th year of the reign of Josiah, the Passover was celebrated in Jerusalem. In order to enforce the laws written in the book that the high priest Hilkiah had found at the temple, King Josiah removed from Jerusalem the rest of Judah all the mediums and fortune tellers and all the household gods, idols, and all the other pagan objects of worship. There had never been a king like him before, who served the Lord with all his heart, mind, and strength, obeying all the law of Moses. Nor has there been a king like him since. But the Lord's fierce anger had been aroused by Judah, by what King Manasseh had done. And even now, it did not die down. The Lord said, I will do to Judah what I have done to Israel. I will banish the people of Judah from my side, and I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and the temple, the place I said where I should be worshipped. Everything else that King Josiah did is recorded in the history of the kings of Judah. While Josiah was king, King Necho of Egypt led an army to the Euphrates River to help the emperor of Assyria. King Josiah tried to stop the Egyptian army at Megiddo and was killed in battle. His officials placed his body in a chariot and took it back to Jerusalem, where he was buried in the royal tombs. The people of Judah chose Josiah's son, Joaz, and anointed him king. If you enjoyed this story, share it on social media. You can find me, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, My Buddy Jimmy, YouTube, My Buddy Jimmy 101, or at MyBuddyJimmy.com.
Spinal adjustments provided by Dr. Chad Rolfson. The Spinal Tuning Chiropractic Center is a Des Moines area low flat fee per month unlimited chiropractic care practice. When life happens, just adjust. Schedule today at spinaltuning.com.
Barbecue provided by Kenny's Rib Wagon, catering ribs for your pleasure and serving daily at Plaza Pub, 62nd and Douglas in Des Moines, across from Merle Hay Mall. Find Kenny's Rib Wagon on Facebook.
The Jimmy Olsen Radio Network.